If you follow this channel for any amount of time, you've known that I've always given away a free gift, which is my Narration EQ guide. So speaking of which, if you don't have my Narration EQ guide and you struggle to get clarity and presence and warmth out of your recordings or out of your audiobook or your voiceover work, you can head to thehomeaudioproject.com/EQ and download my free Narration EQ guide. In this video, I want to show you how the guide actually works and how you can apply it to your voice to get the clarity and presence that you need. So without further ado, let's jump right in. I want to just preface this with saying I already have some preliminary processing on this between compression and a limiter just to get the volume there, but I do not have any EQ on this. Now, for this example, I'm going to use the Pro Tools stock plugin EQ because I want to show you that you can get away with the tools that you already have. Now, the EQ that I'm going to be using has 6 bands. It has the 2 filters, so that's already taken up 2 there. It's got the low pass and the high pass. And then it's got the low frequency, low mids, the high mids, and the high frequency. Now, I will say this recording itself is already very, very clean. So let's get right into it. First thing to note on the EQ quick tips, it says start with these frequencies and move up or down to find the sweet spot that works for your voice. Start with filtering the sub lows and the high end energy with your high pass and your low pass first. Then cut your nasal honk or boxiness. And then after you find what you don't like and all of that is reduced, then you can find what you do like. The main reason why I tend to go work in that fashion is because just the way that we are created, the way that we're put into this world, right? We can't really change our voice. It's just how it is. But the one reason why I always tend to do more subtractive EQ versus additive EQ is because we already sound great. The one thing that gets added, right, are these extra elements. The microphone going into a mic cable, going all the way into our interface, then that gets plugged into our computer. There's digital elements that get added. And I like the concept of less is more, right? So if I can take away what I don't like and then find the 1 frequency or maybe 2 frequencies that I do that I could boost, then I'll do it that way. If we look at the cutting side first, at the sub lows, we have 20 hertz to 80 hertz. Well, obviously between that area, you don't really want to boost anything because that's just going to introduce a lot of sonic boominess and elements that you just don't need in your recording. So we always want to just cut that area, no questions asked, right? I will say I'm going to utilize a feature called EQ solo mode, mainly for my filters. So with my filters, I can just click on this little speaker here, and what that allows me to do is just hear what those frequencies in the filters actually sound like versus needing to boost or cut to get the actual sound of what I don't like or what I do like. So I'm going to play this, and at first you won't hear anything. But then as I move up the filter,
while the guys are talking over one another, desperately trying to be heard over the noise,
you'll hear that the boominess is starting to come through. Between 20 hertz and 80 hertz. Now at 20 hertz, honestly, you can't hear anything. Even at 30 and 40 hertz, it just gets really tough. So of course we want to cut that stuff out. But what's the farthest point that we can move up to? Well, I put moving up to 80. Now that can be subjective, right? I mean, if you're a female, sometimes you can give it a little bit higher than that. If you're a female, I've cut all the way up to 100 to 120 hertz on a female just because there's nothing there anyway. So I'm just going to make sure nothing can get through. But because this is a male recording, let's go up to around 80 hertz.
the whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk.
Now, when I turn off this EQ solo mode speaker, we can hear how much boominess we took away out of those sub lows.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy,
drunk girls, while the guys are talking over one another.
Now, it may sound a little thin because we just kicked it off, the EQ solo mode. So let me back this down and we'll kind of play with this area a little bit more.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk girls, while the guys are talking.
Now I'm going to exaggerate it and go above that 80 hertz.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk girls, while the guys are talking over.
Let's see, now it's starting to introduce just a little bit of thinness. And that's just an area that I don't really want to push. So let's back it down to around 70 hertz.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk girls, while the guys are talking over one another, desperately trying.
And right there, that sounds very, very comfortable to me. Let's jump to our other filter, our low pass or our high cut. We'll do the same thing here. We'll turn on EQ solo mode. And down here on the highs, we've got 10,000 hertz, 20,000 hertz. Now, if we want to cut this area, I do typically cut around the 9,000 to 11,000 hertz, mainly for sibilance, but also a lot of like that high-end, shrilly, ear-piercing stuff that you just don't want anyway. So if we just play that and do the same thing, let's go down to 9,000 hertz and see what we get.
Desperately trying to be heard over the noise. Elle's more than relaxed after having a few drinks. Hell, she's fucking tanked.
Now, we can hear recognizable speech come through, and typically, I don't really like that. I'm just looking for that high-end energy and that sibilance to really kick through. So let's go up to 11,000 hertz.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk girls. While the guys
And right there, it's very shrilly. So if we turn this off, let's see how it sounds.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk girls, while the guys are talking over one another.
Now, the clarity is there, which is what I like, but that shrilliness is gone. Now, there's still some sibilance that kicks through, but we can adjust that with a de-esser in a later phase. So I'm going to leave the filters where they're at. Now, let's keep moving down this list, and let's go to the lows. Right here, we've got 80 to 200 hertz. We can boost 100 to 200 hertz for a deep rumble or some warmth, or we can cut between 150 and 250 hertz for some boominess. Let's look for what we can cut. So let's go to our low filter, and we will go to that 150 hertz roughly, and let's give it a little bit of a boost just so we can hear what we're working with. I will say I'm a fan of seeking and destroying. Because I work with so many narrators and so many audiobooks, I can't just have one frequency for all narrators, right? Every voice is different. So I want to make sure that I give every narrator an equal opportunity to find the frequencies that don't work with their voice or the frequencies that do and either boost them or cut them. So I utilize the technique of seeking and destroying, which means I'm going to search through them, find what I don't like, and then destroying that by either cutting it or opposite of destroying that and actually just boosting it. We'll see what we get here when we boost and we start seeking.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk girls, while the guys are talking over one another, desperately trying to be heard over the noise. Elle's more than
There's something here at 150. And the one thing I will say that I always listen for is when the frequency starts sticking out the most.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk girls.
The main reason why is because that tells my ears, wait, that's sticking out too much, while the rest of the voice around that frequency still sounds clear. That might be a frequency that needs to be looked at. Because 150 is sticking out, we could cut that. So let's just see what it sounds like once we cut it.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk girls.
Now, I'm not going to cut it too much, and we'll just widen out the cue.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk girls, while the guys are talking over.
So right there at 151, we could cut that. Let's go to the next area, which is the low mids. This area I absolutely hate because of the nasalness, the boxiness, the honkiness that this area can give anyone, male or female. So in the low mids, I actually tend to do a lot more cutting than boosting. I don't really ever boost in this area. I don't think I ever have on any audiobook I've ever worked on. So for the sake of this, let's boost this area and let's search and destroy between 300 and 650 hertz and try to see if we can get rid of that nasal honk. Now, if you do find an area, according to my guide here on EQ boosting, at 1,000 hertz that you could boost, 1,000 hertz is like the top end of this low mid area. So if you find something right at the top end of the low mids, you could definitely boost that because that's starting to get into the clarity area. Now, if you're still working within the low mids of 350 to around 900 hertz, where it's still kind of muddy, that's that area you want to cut. So that's why I always suggest around that 300 to 650 to really just hone in on the nasalness, the boxiness, that honkiness, and get rid of it. So let's boost this up. No, we don't probably need that much. And I'm going to widen out the cue just a little bit, and we will search between 300 hertz and 650 hertz.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk girls, while the guys are talking over one another, desperately trying to be heard over the noise. Elle's more than relaxed after having a few drinks. Hell, she's tanked, and I can't get enough.
I'm going to boost this a little bit more to exaggerate it.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk girls.
Right there at 465 hertz, almost 466 hertz. That, to me, sounds the most nasal heavy area. So I'm going to cut that. And because of this area between 300 and 650 hertz, I actually don't like any of those frequencies that are around it. So I tend to widen out the cue to help clean up that area a little bit more. And we can reduce the gain even more to give some of that reduction, because inadvertently it's going to get it clarity.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk girls, while the guys are talking over one another.
So far, we can see what we've got by turning off our EQ and our filters and see what we're working with so far before we move on with the guide.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk girls.
So there's the EQ off with the low filter and the low mids, and here's the filters off.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk girls, while the guys are talking over one another.
Now, it's very subtle, but you can tell by just making those minor adjustments, we've already introduced some clarity, which is why I do a lot more subtractive EQ than additive EQ, because when you take away the stuff you don't like, it inadvertently brings up that clarity and presence. So let's turn these filters and the EQ back on, and we'll continue moving down the guide. So if we're in the mid-range, we can either cut sharp sibilants at 3,000 hertz to 4,000 hertz, or we can boost 1,500 hertz to 2,500 hertz to start adding more presence. So let's again go the way that I usually do it, which is just cutting first. And, honestly, I actually find in the high mids, there's usually a sharp whistle around 3,000 hertz. Again, I'm going to exaggerate this, and I will seek and destroy. We will go to 3,000 hertz.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk girls.
Now, I will say, you're probably wondering, well, yeah, if you boost anything, it's going to sound bad. I agree. In the amount of years I've been doing this, and what I want you to take away from this is the frequency that's sticking out the most. If you cut it and it still sounds bad, did you hit that right frequency? That's what I want you to listen for. So let's move up to 4,000 hertz and just kind of toggle between 3,000 and 4,000 hertz. And if it doesn't work and we're like, okay, none of that really sounds crazy bad, let's leave it. And then we can actually find the area where we could boost around that 1,500 hertz to 2,500 hertz.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk girls, while the guys are talking over one another.
See, that's pretty sharp to me. So in my opinion, I would cut that. But here's the trick. I don't reduce it that much because I want to maintain the clarity we already inadvertently gave it. I just want to get rid of that sharp whistle. So by leaving it narrow and not cutting that much, I'm leaving all of this surrounding stuff, but I'm only cutting this pinpointed frequency. But let's say that really wasn't that bad, right? So let's just zero that back out. And let's say we wanted to boost that 1,500 to 2,500 hertz and see what we got there. So if we bring this down to 1,500 hertz and we boost up, and because when you're boosting, you want it to be more broad rather than pinpointed, this is where you want to widen your cue.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk girls.
That sounds pretty good, but let's go to 2,500 hertz.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk girls, while the guys are talking over one another.
And I'm going to turn off this EQ band, see what we had, and then bring it back to see how much clarity or presence we gave it by giving it a boost.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy, drunk girls, while the guys are talking over one another, desperately trying to be heard over the noise.
Now, it definitely made it very clear, right? It brought up a lot of that presence. So for this, I would actually leave it. But I'm glad that I showed you the cutting portion, right? Because if you do have that sharp whistle and it's sticking out even while you're boosting, you could still use the opportunity to boost this 2,500 hertz, but then still cut at around 3,000 or 4,000 hertz to get rid of that really sharp whistle if you pinpoint it and give it a very narrow cut, right? So let's leave that. And then lastly, because we've already touched the highs with cutting this area, but in the high mids, let's see what we get there. So we're going to use our high frequency. We'll boost this up. We'll do the same thing. And let's look for some vocal tinniness around 6,500 hertz to 7,000 hertz and see if we could also possibly cut that. Let's boost this up. Let's bring this to around that 6,500. See what that sounds like.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy drunk girls.
Ooh, see, that to me is just very, very shrilly. It's very ear piercing.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy
an area that I really don't like. So for cutting, I would absolutely 100% cut that. Not by much, and keep it very, very narrow. But if I, on the opposite end, wanted to look for a little bit more clarity, it says right here, 6,000 hertz for clarity, less harsh than 4,000 hertz. Let's go to 6,000 hertz and see if we could boost it a little bit more.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy drunk girls, while the guys are talking.
Now, to me, I don't know if you've noticed this, too much sibilance came through. So in my personal opinion, this would be an area that I would absolutely cut, or honestly, if we just shut this band off.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy drunk girls, while the guys are talking over.
Yeah, I would absolutely cut this area specifically for this recording, just because even with the EQ off, some of that sibilance and a little too much presence came through. So if we go to 6,500 to 7,000 hertz and turn this band back on.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy drunk girls, while the guys are talking over one another, desperately trying to be heard over the noise.
Yeah, and we would just cut that just a little bit.
The whole table is a mess of sloppy drunk girls, while the guys are talking.
Now, there's still a little bit of sibilance that comes through. A de-esser would probably be my next plugin of choice after this to get rid of a little bit more, just to tame down that sibilance. So all in all, I really hope this shows you how my Narration EQ guide can give you, in quick, easy moves with just a handful of EQ bands, can give you the clarity, the presence, and depth that you need. If you do not already have the Narration EQ guide, I really want you to have it. I know it will help you 100% if you are already getting nice, clean recordings. I know this Narration EQ guide will be able to help you. So head to thehomeaudioproject.com/EQ and grab it. Hey, Ryan here from the future. I also wanted to pop in real quick just to let you know that if you got any value out of this, besides the Narration EQ guide, I also came out with an audiobook mastering course called Total Audiobook Mastering. And there's also a companion course with extra guides, extra step-by-step tutorials on EQ. You get a custom processing review. And I know it'll take your audiobook mastering to the next level, especially if you're a self-producing narrator. Total Audiobook Mastering will give you a self-paced, guided walkthrough on how to master your audiobooks effortlessly. So I'll have a link down below in the description to check out Total Audiobook Mastering and its companion course. I'll see you in the next video.